The New York Times recently announced that they would rehire, meaning bring back one of their former reporters, a gentleman by the name of Nicholas Kristof. I'm sure you've heard of him. He will be an opinion writer. So he's just basically going back to his old post. Kristof has covered domestic and international affairs for 37 years at the Times and has written countless articles. But for the purposes of this discussion, I think it's worth taking a look at what should be a super controversial opinion he has. And he has maintained this opinion for, at this point, over a decade. And it is the idea that sweatshops are great. Not even kidding. Have various examples. Let's go to one example from January 5th of 2009, where Kristof writes, while it shocks Americans to hear it, the central challenge in the poorest countries is not that sweatshops exploit too many people, but that they don't exploit enough. He wrote that. He wrote that. Okay, maybe I'm being unfair. It's just one snippet of his 2009 piece. Let me read more. Talk to these families in the dump. And a job in a sweatshop is a cherished dream, an escalator out of poverty, the kind of gauzy, if probably unrealistic ambition that parents everywhere often have for their children. I don't know about your parents, John, okay? But I have come across many parents who are like, I really wish that my kids could end up in a sweatshop. Now, if you want to take a look at what exploitation of labor looks like in some of these countries, I think one of the prime examples is what we heard about Foxconn, which is one of these factories in China that produces many of the electronic items that we love and enjoy, things like iPhones. There was a huge problem with their workers literally killing themselves as a result of their terrible pay and terrible working conditions. Here's a reminder of why they were so unhappy and why some of these Chinese workers took their own lives.
Foxconn is notorious for its military style of management, and it has been blamed for the string of suicides, 17 in total in 2010, that occurred in the factory premises. The company tried very hard to stop the suicides, though none of this was done with any goodwill or intentions. They did not do this by digging out the roots of the exploitation, but instead actually erected anti-jumping nets on their buildings. Never before had a modern factory ever hidden behind such a suicide prevention tactic. It reminded people of the last time such a device was used on transatlantic slave ships centuries ago. Further investigation into the working conditions gives us an even bleaker view of the whole situation. There was a lot of outcry when it was revealed that Foxconn's approximately 400,000 assembly workers were making only a mere 900 yuan a month. This is equivalent to $138 US.
According to Nicholas Kristof, that's a dream for the children of parents everywhere. John, what do you think?
Yeah, it would be bad enough if it was just, and he sort of gets into this in the full piece, talking about, I'm really worried about well, if you increase the labor standards here, then this particular type of industry will go here. And then, so at this point, it's probably the most money that these people could make. We can gradually raise the standard of living and the labor protections, but we have to make sure that it doesn't spook up. If it was that sort of thing, it would theoretically be annoying enough at that point. But to try to cloak it in this the gauzy ambitions of parenthood and dreams of the next generation, don't try to be poetic when your entire argument that you're making is just glorified bootlicking. It's, sure, the status quo sucks. Capitalism is a wheat thresher and we are the wheat. We're there to be threshed for our labor, but you really can't expect anything better. And honestly, I'm being paid well to defend this, so I'm gonna continue to do that, while at the same time getting to get this aura that I say bold things. Everybody else seems to think sweatshops are a bad thing. No, I'm gonna be bold and I'm gonna make the case that they're actually good without ever actually making that case. But the headline seems as if I'm a real maverick.
Yeah, I mean, look, to be fair to Kristof here, it is incredibly bold to have the pro-corporate, anti-worker stance in corporate media. I mean, we've never seen that before, so he's really unique in that regard. As you can imagine, I'm being super sarcastic here. Let me read some more from this piece. And by the way, this is just one of many Okay, so he says, I'm glad that many Americans are repulsed by the idea of importing products made by barely paid, barely legal workers in dangerous factories. By the way, in some cases, like clothing or garment factories in various countries that get exploited for cheap labor, the workers are children in a lot of cases, like literal children. But let me continue. Yet sweatshops are only a symptom of poverty, not a cause. How about sweatshops are a symptom of capitalist greed? How about that? I think that's the correct take, and I'll explain in a moment. But let me continue that. Let me just finish that graphic. At a time of tremendous economic distress and protectionist pressures, there's a special danger that tighter labor standards will be used as an excuse to curb trade. Okay, so let's pause for a second. Because the fact of the matter is, what we're experiencing with exploited labor in other countries very much has to do with wages stagnating here in the United States. So the idea was, look, in order to kind of keep Americans happy, even though their wages will remain stagnant for decades to come, we got to provide cheaper products. How do we provide cheaper products? And the way they do that is by exploiting cheap labor in other countries. So all of this is done not to benefit poor people living in impoverished countries, not to benefit ordinary Americans. All of that, by the way, it doesn't benefit ordinary Americans. We might get cheap goods that are manufactured in other countries. But as we've noticed, with something like a pandemic, any disruption to our supply chain is a complete and utter disaster. For instance, I haven't had a car for over a month at this point because there's one part that I need that is not manufactured here in the United States. It's manufactured elsewhere, and it has been back. No, it's not an engine. Although engines used to be manufactured here, very few are now. But no, it's called a body control module, and I haven't had a car, right? So we don't manufacture it here. It's a huge problem, but that's not the end of the story, right? We're also at a significant disadvantage because our wages are intentionally kept low. And on top of that, all of these manufacturing jobs that used to exist within the United States were shipped abroad, meaning jobs were outsourced in order to exploit this cheap labor. So when we talk about the decimation of the manufacturing sector in America, it's very much the result of these corporations looking to exploit cheap labor in other countries. And to make the argument that this is good, that it benefits everyone is ridiculous, when in reality, it only benefits one small group of people, and it's the corporate overlords who want to maximize their profits. Yeah,
100%. It seems crazy to have written it even in 2009, but that said, it was 2009. It is possible that now coming back to that position, he will revisit some of this stuff. And politically, there's been a lot of both evolution and devolution in America. A lot of people have been exposed to progressive thought in a way that wasn't nearly as common nationally, or at the national level, I should say, back then. We'll see what he has to say about that stuff. In the meantime, one particular op-ed person, to me, it doesn't bother me as much as the fact that so many politicians effectively make the same argument as him. I mean, they may not make it specifically about sweatshops, but they'll talk about how it would be a terrible, terrible thing for the working class to raise the minimum wage. Anytime you advocate for an improvement to either the economic situation or the working conditions, they're gonna try to convince you that the boot pressing down your neck is actually keeping you in place, that it's good for you. And so, like having the op-ed person write that is bad. Having the articles reflect the same basic idea, having the newsman barking it at you night after night, I think is an even bigger problem.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's all a big problem, right? Because you have this chorus of legacy and corporate media outlets telling us everything. It's like the upside down world. Everything is sold to us in a way to make us think like like the economic frustrations that we're feeling shouldn't be like, we shouldn't feel frustrated. Like everything's working the way it's supposed to work. And it's actually great that people are being exploited. And by the way, real quick, I just wanna go through all the other examples because this isn't one piece. It would be bad enough if it was one 2009 piece and the New York Times decided to bring him back anyway. September 24th of 2000, literal headline to his piece. 2 cheers for sweatshops. There's more. Excerpts from it. The campaign against sweatshops risks harming the very people it is intended to help. For beneath their grime, sweatshops are a clear sign of the industrial revolution that is beginning to reshape Asia. We should be calling for working conditions and pay to improve in Asia, not to celebrate them being exploited. Fast forward to 2002. This is June 25th of 2002. Let them sweat.
Oh my God.
The headline reads.
I mean, to be fair, we don't know for sure that he's choosing the headlines, but he's definitely choosing the words in the articles. Sometimes it's the editorial board that chooses those, but still, it's a terrible decision for them to make.
Yeah, and there is a bit of good news. Last October, he announced that he was leaving the New York Times to run as a Democrat in a race to replace Oregon Governor Kate Brown. But in February, the Oregon Supreme Court ruled that he cannot run for governor in that state because he does not meet the state's 3-year residency requirements. So let's get some actual progressives to run for these offices to represent people who are typically underrepresented in government. Ordinary workers and people who demand better working conditions, better pay, and have a more internationalist perspective where they don't celebrate the idea of workers getting exploited in other countries.